Well, after a week, Wizards finally decided to post something about the OGL on D&D Beyond, but I've got to say it's definitely too little too late. I'm going to give it a read through and comment as I go. When we initially conceived of the revising the OGL, it was with three major goals in mind. First, we wanted the ability to prevent the use of D&D from being included in hateful and discriminatory products. Second, we wanted to address those attempting to use D&D in Web3, blockchain games, and NFTs by making clear that OGL content is limited to tabletop role-playing content like campaigns, modules, and supplements. And third, we wanted to ensure that the OGL is for the content creator, the home brewer, the aspiring designer, our players, and the community, not major corporations to use for their own commercial and promotional purpose. Driving these goals were two simple principles. One, our job is to be good stewards of the game. And two, the OGL exists for the benefit of the fans. Nothing about those principles has wavered for a second. I've got to kind of disagree that it is their job to be a steward of the game. I've got no use for blockchain games and NFTs, but I think they're more worried about protecting their new VTT than any of that. On to the next part. That was why our early drafts of the new OGL included the provisions they did. That draft language was provided to content creators and publishers so their feedback could be considered before anything was finalized. In addition to language allowing us to address discriminatory and hateful conduct and clarifying what types of products the OGL covers, our drafts included royalty language designed to apply to large corporations attempting to use OGL content. It was never our intent to impact the vast majority of the community. No, but you did. You can't take out the big boys without hurting the small ones too. And who is to say what is discriminatory and hateful? Because, this is set in a medieval fantasy era. And yes, it is fantasy. But you've got to remember, at this time, through a lot of this, discrimination was a real problem. If you address that problem in a game, is that hateful? Is acknowledging that slavery was a thing hateful? You've got to have some lines here that, there's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area. And I think they're forgetting that. They are so power hungry to want to control what you think and how you think. And I think that whole ultra woke mentality is going to run them out of business. The same way that overly offensive attitudes and hyper control did with TSR. You can't go one way, you can't go the other. You've got to let the game's players be their own guide. And that is why I think any changes to the OGL will be a mistake. Especially now that we've got the start of the ORC. I've got a feeling Dungeons and Dragons days as the game are almost over. And that's coming from a guy who's been doing this for 42 years. I don't want it to die. But I don't want to put up with this either. There's just too many things that can be called discriminatory. It's too easy to say, oh, well, we think that's discriminatory. You can't use our product. I mean, if you're going to address issues like different species being treated differently, is that racism? Is that discrimination? Can you have slavery? Can you have a religious war where it's an advanced society trying to crack down and enforce their gods on a more primitive society that is perhaps, like the whites, or let me change that phrase, like the Europeans did with Africa and the Americas. Does portraying that in the game qualify as discrimination? Are you required to include transgender and gay abilities? If you don't have a gay character, is that discriminatory? What about if you're trying to address that issue? Is having a gay character being persecuted and you're trying to show that, is that discriminatory? I mean, the word is just too easy to be abused. Okay, back to what is actually here. However, it's clear from the reaction that we rolled a 1. Oh yeah, on a stat you already had negative penalties on. It has been clear that it is no longer possible to fully achieve all 3 goals while still staying true to our principles. So here's what we are doing. The next OGL will contain provisions that allow us to protect and cultivate the inclusive environment we are trying to build, and specify that it covers only content for TTRPGs. That means that other expressions such as educational and charitable campaigns, live streams, cosplay, VTT uses, etc., will remain unaffected by any OGL update. Content already released under 1.0a will also remain unaffected. Well, at least they're not trying to roll it back. That was really part of the core of my anger, but the gatekeeping really bothers me. And I know they're trying to protect their virtual tabletop. They're used to dealing, their new heads are both from Microsoft, and they're used to dealing with video game rights, and they're stuck in that mentality. And this is not a video game. These are real people. They're dealing with real opinions, and you cannot regulate that in any way and allow free speech. So they're saying, if we don't like what you're saying, we can tell you to discontinue it at any time. Now, I'm the last guy to complain. I mean, yes, I am a straight white male. I have never pretended to be otherwise. But, I have been hit on by gay guys. And I never considered it an insult. I said, thank you very much. I'm not interested, but I never took it as anything other than a compliment. So, I have no hate for the gay community. I have no hate for minorities. I grew up in minority areas. The area where I started my first grade was considered a barrio. When I was in high school, we lived on a reservation. When I was in the military, where I was stationed, my apartment was in what they called the International District, or the unofficial name was Little Korea. I have been around minorities my entire life, and always figured folks is folks. How good you tan don't matter. But to try to enforce a code where you're trying to jam these things in, it doesn't work. We've got to get away from that Seattle, Western Washington, ultra woke ideology that outside of a few areas is just not there. It's one thing to say that, you can't produce something that says, one race is inferior to another, but it's really not practical when you're talking about different species and attitudes. If you want to play a setting, create a setting using the OGL that's set in the Civil War, can you do it? It's going to include the Confederate flag. It's going to include slavery. Is that hateful? Or is it historically accurate? Odds are both and neither, These things just aren't that cut and dried. Sorry, wizards. Gatekeeping is not your job. Teaching us morals is not your job. As long as you have that attitude, well, I might continue to give you input on the playtest. I might even go watch the movie. I've waited a long time for this. I even own all three of the original movies, and nobody's going to accuse those of being Academy Award winners. But they were Dungeons and Dragons, and I bought them. I love the brand. Please keep the politics out of it. Okay, back to off my rant and on to what it says. What it will not contain is any royalty structure. It also will not include the license back provision that some people were afraid was a means for us to steal work. That thought never crossed our minds. Under the new OGL, you will own the content you create. We won't. Any language we put down will be crystal clear and unequivocal on that point. The license-backed language was intended to protect us and our partners from creators who incorrectly allege that we steal their work simply because of coincidental similarities. As we continue to invest in the game that we love and move forward with partnerships in film, television, and digital games, that risk is simply too great to ignore. Well, unfortunately, you've been doing this for 50 years, and there's been no major cases. You're thinking like video game designers. Stop it. This is role-playing games. Yes, there will be a virtual tabletop. That does not mean it's a video game. You can't control the message because that's up to the dungeon master. That's the dungeon master's job, not yours. I never had any thoughts that they were truly going to steal their property, but their wording was just so bad that you couldn't say that wasn't a risk. I really don't think that they can come back from this. The new OGL will contain provisions to address the risk, but we will do it without a license back and without suggesting we have the rights to the content you create. Your ideas and imagination are what makes this game special, and that belongs to you. Yes, it does. But that also means that if your imagination includes slavery, or your imagination includes religious persecution, if you expect for women in the day to be given equal rights, you're definitely not playing in a fantasy era or in a medieval era. Yeah, fantasy, maybe. And, I played plenty of games where women had equal rights. Mostly they do. And I don't have a problem with that. Matter of fact, out of the 4 characters I'm playing right now, one is female. And she's an arena champion. Just took down some big Yonti Centaur thing to take the championship. But doesn't mean that I expect other people to make that in every game. I've also had games where the women were treated like dirt and had to fight back to get anything close to respect. And I've played in games where that division wasn't questioned. The women played period women that were didn't object to how things were because that was just the way they were. I've seen it all from one extreme to the other, and I've had societies that were Amazonal, where the men were the minority and they had no right. And just about every extreme thereof, from matriarchal societies to where, men were basically hunted. Okay, well, let's see. Back to what they said. A couple of last thoughts. First, we won't be able to release the OGL today because we need to make sure we get it right. But it is coming. Yeah. So's Christmas. Second, you're going to hear people say that they won and we lost because making your voices heard forced us to change our plans. These people will be only half right. They won, and so did we. Well, we'll see about that. I'm not sure you guys can recover. Hasbro and D&D has tarnished their name, and I'm not one of the ones that come out and bash this hardcore. I stayed silent on it because I wanted to see where they went. And I'm ashamed of it. It was so much worse than I even imagined. And they're still not letting it go. Just let the 1.0A stand. Our plan was always to solicit the input of our community before any update to the OGL. So how come you made people sign NDAs before they got their agreements? I'm sorry, that kind of secretive behavior is just almost unforgivable. That is something that is done by crooked corporations and shady politicians. The drafts you've seen were attempting to do just that. Well, why, if they were drafts, why'd they come with contracts? We want to always delight fans and create experiences together that everyone loves. We realize that we did not do that this time, and we are sorry for that. Our goal was to get exactly the type of feedback on which provisions worked and which did not. None of them worked, which we ultimately got from you. Any change this major could only have been done well if we were willing to take that feedback, no matter how it was provided. So we are. Thank you for caring enough to let us know what works and what doesn't. What you need and what scares you. What scares me is your gatekeeping. That's what scares me. You having sole say over what you can cancel. Until you're willing to give that up, I am not putting another dime in your pocket. I will give you free advice. I will continue to use your free services, but my money will be going to other systems until you let go of the gatekeeping. Without knowing that, we can't do our, without knowing that, we can't make our part, without knowing that, we can't do our part to make the new OGL match our principles. Well, your principles are all about making money. and controlling people's thoughts. As long as you're trying to do those, I mean, I really don't have problems with you wanting to make money. But those multi-million-dollar competitors are multi-million-dollar advertisements for your game. Every one of them mentioned somewhere in there Dungeons and Dragons, because that is the start of it all. When somebody says, what is role playing? The first thing you say is, it's like Dungeons and Dragons. Finally, we appreciate the chance to make this right. Okay. Leave the OGL alone. We love D&D's devoted players and the creators who take them on so many incredible adventures. We won't let you down. Well, you have. And until you keep your politics out of this, there's not going to be a way to do this properly. So, good luck, guys. You're going to need it.